Part 1. The ship hung in the darkness between stars, its silver hull catching the faint light of distant suns. Inside, 7 researchers from the Collective of Entertainment Research gathered around a holographic display, their various body forms casting strange shadows on the curved walls. They had spent 300 years studying humor across the galaxy. They had jokes from 17 star systems. They had witnessed comedy in forms that would make most species weep or scream, or simply shut down their nervous systems entirely. But they had never seen anything like this. Lead researcher stood closest to the display, her crystalline body humming with frequencies that indicated deep confusion. She was made of living mineral, her thoughts traveling through lattices of quantum-aligned crystal, and in all her centuries of existence, she had never encountered data that refused to make sense. Until now. "Play it again," she said. The holographic display flickered, and once more they watched the transmission they had intercepted from a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system. The transmission showed a human, a soft, fleshy biped with an internal skeleton and a surprisingly vulnerable body, walking across a hard surface. The human was looking at a small device in its hands, not watching where it was going. It walked directly into a transparent barrier and bounced backward, falling to the ground. And then came the sound. Other humans nearby made a rapid, rhythmic noise with their respiratory systems. Their faces contorted. Their bodies shook. Some of them bent over, holding their midsections as if in pain. "They are laughing," said Junior Analyst. He was a being of bioluminescent tissue, his patches of light flickering between purple and orange to show his emotional state. Right now, they were flickering very fast. They are expressing amusement at the suffering of another member of their species. "That cannot be correct," said Operative. He resembled a collection of floating geometric shapes held together by invisible forces. "No species in our archives laughs at pain. The laugh only during their mating ceremonies. The owl express irony only when completely safe. The use aggressive comedy, but even they do not mock genuine injury." Raised 1 crystalline appendage for silence. Play the next file. The display changed. Now it showed a human standing on a raised platform in front of many other humans. This single human was speaking, telling a story. The story was about its own failures. It described losing employment, losing a romantic partner, and losing its dwelling. It described these events in great detail, emphasizing how terrible they had been. And the crowd of humans laughed. They laughed hard and long. The more the speaker described its suffering, the more the audience seemed to enjoy themselves. "This is impossible," said. "They are celebrating misfortune, their own misfortune." "There is more," said quietly. "Show them the funeral file." The researchers watched in growing horror as the display showed a human death ritual. A human body had ceased functioning, and other humans had gathered to dispose of the remains. This was normal. Every species had death rituals. What was not normal was what happened next. The humans began telling stories about the dead one. Some stories were sad, but many stories were funny. The gathered humans laughed at memories of the deceased doing foolish things, saying foolish things, making mistakes. They laughed at someone who would never laugh again. "They mock their dead," said, his geometric shapes rotating in distress. "No," said slowly. "I do not think that is what they are doing. I think this is something else entirely, something we have never encountered." She turned to face her team, her crystal structure catching the light and breaking it into rainbows. "The collective has studied humor for 300 years. We have documented comedy from 4,291 sentient species. We understand the function of humor in social bonding. We understand its role in establishing hierarchy. We understand how it activates pleasure centers in most neural systems." She paused, her frequencies shifting to indicate great seriousness. "But we have never encountered a species that uses humor against reality itself. Look at these humans. They laugh at failure. They laugh at pain. They laugh at death. They do not laugh because they fail to understand these things. They laugh precisely because they understand them. Then they are insane, said. Perhaps, agreed. Or perhaps they have discovered something that 4,291 other species missed. I am proposing a field study. We will travel to this planet they call Earth. We will embed ourselves among the humans. We will observe their comedy in its natural environment. And we will attempt to understand how one species can find humor in absolutely everything. The journey to Earth took 4 months in standard time. The researchers used that time to study human transmissions, trying to prepare themselves for what they would encounter. It did not help. Every new piece of data only confused them more. They discovered that humans had invented something called sarcasm, where they said the opposite of what they meant and expected others to understand. They discovered that humans made jokes about their planet being destroyed, about their species going extinct, about their civilizations collapsing. They found evidence of humor about war, disease, economic failure, and personal tragedy. Most disturbing of all, they discovered that humans seemed to laugh hardest at the most terrible things. The darker the subject, the funnier humans seemed to find it. This defies all established models, reported during a briefing. In every other species, humor decreases as danger increases. The stop laughing entirely when threatened. The owl become completely serious during crisis. But humans appear to do the opposite. The worse things get, the more they joke. Show me examples, requested. Displayed a series of human communications from various historical disasters, earthquakes, floods, wars, plagues. In each case, the researchers found evidence of humans making jokes while the disasters were still ongoing. Sometimes the victims themselves were the ones joking. During their Second World War, said, humans in concentration camps told jokes about their captors. While facing genocide, they created comedy. There are documented cases of humans laughing on their way to execution. The researchers sat in silence for a long moment. We must understand this, finally said. This is not random behavior. This is too consistent across their entire species to be random. There must be a reason. There must be a function we are not seeing. When they finally arrived at Earth, they established an observation post on the planet's moon and sent probes to the surface. The probes were designed to look like ordinary Earth objects so they would not be noticed. One probe looked like a rock. One looked like a small domestic animal. One looked like a piece of trash, which turned out to be the most effective disguise of all, since humans seemed to ignore trash completely. The data they collected in those first weeks was overwhelming. Humans joked constantly. They joked at work. They joked at home. They joked with strangers. They joked alone, speaking to themselves or to their computer devices. They seemed incapable of going very long without attempting humor. I have identified 847 distinct categories of human humor, reported. These include wordplay, physical comedy, observational humor, self-deprecation, absurdism, irony, satire, parody, and something called the pun, which other humans seem to both love and hate simultaneously. What about the dark humor? Asked. The humor about death and suffering. It is everywhere, admitted. They do not reserve it for special occasions. They use it daily. They make jokes about their own mortality while eating breakfast. They laugh about the inevitable heat death of the universe while performing their work duties. They seem to find the meaninglessness of existence genuinely amusing. Made a decision. We need closer observation. It is time for direct contact. We will assume human forms and walk among them. We will experience their comedy firsthand. Only then can we hope to understand. The researchers looked at each other with various expressions of concern. Going among an alien species directly was dangerous, but they had come too far to stop now. They had encountered something unprecedented in 300 years of research. They had found a species that laughed at the void. They needed to know why. Part 2. 6 months passed. 6 months of living among humans, working beside them, listening to their conversations, watching their entertainment, and trying desperately to understand how their minds worked. The research team had scattered across the planet, each member assigned to study a different aspect of human comedy. They regrouped monthly to share findings, and each meeting was more chaotic than the last. Operative had been assigned to observe something called stand-up comedy. He had assumed human form and attended performances at small venues where single humans stood on stages and spoke to crowds. He had expected to find patterns. He had expected to identify formulas. Instead, he had found chaos. "They say things that should not be funny," he reported at the monthly meeting, his projected human face looking exhausted. "They describe terrible experiences, painful memories, embarrassing moments. The audience should feel uncomfortable. Instead, they laugh. I have analyzed the linguistic patterns, the timing, the delivery. I cannot find the mechanism." "Did you laugh?" asked. Was silent for a moment. "Yes," he finally admitted. "I did not mean to, it simply happened. A human on stage was describing the death of his father. It should have been sad. He was crying while he spoke. But he was also making jokes, and the crowd was laughing and crying at the same time, and suddenly I was doing the same thing. I do not understand how that is possible." Had been studying internet communication. He had immersed himself in something called social media, where humans shared thoughts and images with each other across great distances. What he had found there had changed him in ways the others found concerning. "They have created a new form of communication," he explained, his bioluminescent patches flickering rapidly. "They call them memes. They are images combined with text, and they spread from human to human like viruses. Many of them make no logical sense. They reference other memes, which reference other memes, creating layers of meaning that can only be understood by those who have seen all the previous iterations." He projected an image onto the display. It showed a cartoon frog sitting on a chair. The text simply said, "Feels bad man." "This image has been viewed billions of times," said. "Billions. And I understand why. I cannot explain why, but I understand. When I look at this frog, I feel something. Something that has no name in our language." "You have been compromised," said with concern. "Perhaps," agreed. "But I do not wish to return to how I was before. These humans have found a way to communicate emotions that our species cannot even experience. Their humor is not just entertainment. It is a language unto itself." Had taken the most difficult assignment. She had been studying how humans used humor during grief and tragedy. She had attended funerals. She had visited hospitals. She had observed humans receiving terrible news and watched how they responded. "I went to a support group," she told the others. "A gathering of humans who have all lost close family members to a specific disease. These humans were in deep pain. They were processing terrible grief. And do you know what they did for most of the meeting?" "They cried," guessed. "They joked," corrected. "They made jokes about the disease that had killed their loved ones. They made jokes about death. They made jokes about each other and about themselves. They laughed so hard that sometimes the laughter became crying, and then the crying became laughter again, and the two states seemed almost identical." She paused, her crystalline structure humming with complex frequencies. "I asked one of them why. Why do you laugh at something so painful?" And she looked at me with complete understanding and said something I will never forget. She said, "Because if I don't laugh, I'll never stop crying." The researchers considered this in silence. "That is a survival mechanism," finally said. "They use humor to process emotions they cannot otherwise handle." "Yes," agreed, "but it is more than that. Watch." She projected her own recording onto the display. It showed the support group gathering at the end of their meeting. They were hugging each other. They were exchanging contact information. They were making plans to meet again, to spend time together outside the group. "They became friends," explained. "Complete strangers who came together because of tragedy, and within 2 hours they were bonded. The jokes did that. The shared laughter created connection faster than any social protocol I have ever observed, faster than any bonding ritual in our archives. Humor as social adhesive, mused. We knew that already. Many species use humor for bonding. Not like this, said firmly. Other species use humor in times of safety and comfort. Humans use humor in times of crisis. The worse things get, the more they joke, and the more they joke, the closer they become. They have weaponized comedy against isolation itself. The next month brought new revelations. Had attended more comedy shows and had begun to notice something important. Human comedians often talked about things that were normally forbidden. They discussed death, disease, prejudice, violence, and bodily functions. They said things that would be considered rude or inappropriate in normal conversation. The comedy stage is a special space, he reported. Within that space, humans can discuss anything. Topics that are taboo everywhere else become acceptable when framed as jokes. The laughter gives permission. It creates a safe zone where difficult truths can be spoken. That is significant, said. They use humor to approach things they cannot otherwise approach. The joke is a shield that allows them to look at what would otherwise be too painful to see. Had gone deeper into internet culture and emerged with disturbing news. I have found their darkest humor, he said. It is called shitposting. I apologize for the vulgarity, but that is what they call it. It is humor that deliberately makes no sense. It is absurdity for its own sake, and it is incredibly popular. He showed examples. They were incomprehensible, images distorted beyond recognition, text that followed no logical pattern, references to references to references until all meaning collapsed into chaos. I believe this is their most evolved form of humor, said slowly. They have looked at the meaninglessness of existence, and instead of despairing, they have created art from it. They take the absurdity of being alive and amplify it until it becomes funny. They are not denying that life makes no sense. They are celebrating it. The other researchers stared at him with concern. You have definitely been compromised, said. We all have, replied quietly. Look at us. We have spent 6 months studying human humor and it has changed us. Laughed at a funeral story, feels emotions from cartoon frogs. I find myself making small jokes in my internal monologue. The human approach to comedy is contagious. Is that dangerous? Asked. Considered the question carefully. I do not think so, she finally said. I think it might be the opposite. I think these humans have discovered something valuable, something that could benefit many species. What have they discovered? A way to survive anything, said. Every species faces suffering. Every species faces death. Most species respond with fear or denial or despair. Humans respond with laughter, and somehow, impossibly, it works. The laughter does not make the suffering go away, but it makes the suffering bearable. It creates connection during isolation. It builds hope during hopelessness. It turns pain into something that can be shared and processed and eventually overcome. She looked at her team, her crystal structure catching the light. We came here to study a form of entertainment. I believe we have found something far more important. We have found a survival technology that operates through comedy, and we must understand it fully before we report back to the collective. The team agreed to extend their study. There was still so much they did not understand. They had scratched the surface of human humor, but the depths remained unexplored. Somewhere in those depths lay the answer to a question they had not known to ask. How does a fragile species survive in a hostile universe? The humans had found an answer, and that answer was laughter. Part 3. The earthquake struck without warning. One moment the ground was solid and still, and the next moment it was moving like water, rolling in waves that toppled buildings and split roads open like wounds. Was in her human form when it happened, walking through a city that suddenly became a disaster zone. She survived because she was not really human, because her crystalline core held together even as the false flesh around it was damaged. But the real humans around her were not so fortunate. She saw buildings collapse. She saw people trapped under rubble. She heard screaming and crying and the terrible silence of those who would never make sounds again. The research team regrouped in the aftermath, shaken but functional. They had never intended to be present for a major disaster. They had planned to observe human comedy in normal circumstances, but now they had an unprecedented opportunity. They could watch how humans used humor in the face of genuine catastrophe. What they witnessed changed everything. The emergency response began within minutes. Humans in uniforms arrived to pull survivors from wreckage. Volunteers appeared to distribute water and blankets. Medical personnel worked without rest, treating the injured and comforting the dying. It was impressive but not surprising. Many species responded to disasters with coordinated effort. What was surprising was what came next. Within hours of the earthquake, the jokes began. Monitored human communication channels and watched in astonishment as humor spread through the disaster zone like a second wave. People trapped in buildings sent text messages to family members that included jokes about their situation. Rescue workers traded dark comments about the bodies they were finding. Survivors in emergency shelters laughed together about the absurdity of losing everything they owned. "They are doing it again," she reported to her team. "They are laughing at disaster, but this is not denial. They are not pretending the earthquake did not happen. They are making jokes specifically about the earthquake, about the destruction, about the deaths." "Show us," requested. She projected a recording onto their shared display. It showed two humans sitting in a pile of rubble that had once been their home. Everything they owned was destroyed. Their faces were covered in dust and cuts. One of them was bleeding from a wound on the forehead. "Well," one human said to the other, "I guess I don't have to worry about fixing that leaky roof anymore." They both laughed. They laughed hard and long, holding each other and shaking with the force of it. And then they started crying. And then they started laughing again. The two states mixed together until they were impossible to separate. "I do not understand," said. "How can they find that funny? Their home is destroyed." "That is exactly why they find it funny," said slowly. "The joke acknowledges the reality. It says, yes, this terrible thing has happened and there is nothing we can do about it. The laughter is not denial. The laughter is acceptance." They continued to monitor the disaster response over the following days. What they found was consistent across every observation point. Wherever there was suffering, there was also humor. The jokes were not separate from the tragedy. They were woven through it, inseparable from the grief and the fear and the determination to survive. Emergency workers told jokes to keep themselves functional during long shifts. Survivors told jokes to bond with strangers in shelters. Families told jokes about lost loved ones, celebrating their memories even while mourning their deaths. The comedy and the tragedy existed together, two faces of the same human response to catastrophe. "I have been analyzing the psychological effects," reported. "The humans who joke show better outcomes. They process trauma faster. They form support networks more quickly. They maintain hope more effectively. The humor is not a distraction from healing. The humor is part of how they heal." Had been studying the rescue workers specifically. "They call it dark humor," he said. "They know it would seem inappropriate to outsiders. They make jokes about death and destruction and human suffering, and they know these jokes would disturb people who had not experienced what they have experienced. But among themselves, the jokes create solidarity. The jokes say we have seen terrible things together and we are still here and we can still laugh." Made her decision. "I have enough data to write my report," she announced. "I understand now what human humor is. I understand what it does and why it matters. And I believe the collective needs to hear this immediately." She spent 3 days composing her findings. She worked carefully, wanting to convey not just the facts but the significance of what they had discovered. When she was finished, she gathered her team for a final review. Human humor is not a form of entertainment, she began. It is a survival adaptation unlike anything in our archives. Humans did not evolve on a comfortable world. Their planet is dangerous. It has earthquakes and floods and storms. It has predators and diseases and scarcity. The human species should have gone extinct many times over. Instead, they survived. And I believe humor is a key reason why. She projected data onto the display. Charts showing stress hormones dropping after laughter. Studies demonstrating improved immune function from regular humor. Evidence that social bonds formed through shared jokes were stronger than bonds formed any other way. Laughter is not just emotional, she continued. It is physiological. It changes human bodies in measurable ways. It reduces stress. It increases resilience. It creates chemical bonds between individuals. When humans laugh together, they become temporarily connected at a biological level. They become, for a moment, a single organism working toward a single goal, survival. But why dark humor specifically? Asked. Why do they laugh at the worst things? Because the worst things are what they most need to survive, answered. Think about it from their perspective. They know they are going to die. Every human knows this from a young age. Their bodies will fail. Their loved ones will be lost. Their civilizations will eventually collapse. Everything they build will eventually turn to dust. This knowledge could destroy them. It could paralyze them with despair. It could make existence unbearable. She paused, her crystal structure humming with frequencies she had not known she possessed before coming to Earth. Instead, they laugh at it. They look at death and destruction and the meaninglessness of existence, and they make jokes. The jokes do not make these things less terrible. The jokes make these things bearable. The laughter says, yes, the universe is cruel and random and unfair, but I refuse to let it defeat me. I refuse to let it take my joy. I refuse to let it stop me from connecting with others and finding meaning in the time I have. The team was silent for a long moment. It is rebellion, finally said. Their humor is an act of rebellion against reality itself. Yes, agreed. And it works. They have survived ice ages and plagues and wars. They have built civilizations in hostile environments. They have developed technologies that let them reach beyond their own planet, and through all of it they have laughed. They have found something funny in every catastrophe, every tragedy, every moment of despair. The laughter kept them going when nothing else could. She transmitted her report to the collective that night. It was the most important document she had ever written. She was recommending not just the archival of human comedy, but something far more significant. Humanity should not simply be studied, her conclusion read. They should be recruited. Any species capable of laughing at the apocalypse is a species we want as allies. Any species that can find humor in extinction is a species that will never truly be defeated. They have mastered something that has eluded thousands of other civilizations, the ability to face the darkness without being consumed by it. She added a final note, something personal that was not strictly necessary for the official record, but that she felt compelled to include. I came to Earth expecting to study entertainment. I found something that changed me instead. The humans taught me that existence does not have to be serious simply because it is difficult. They taught me that laughter and grief can exist in the same moment. They taught me that finding something funny does not mean failing to take it seriously. It means refusing to let seriousness destroy you. I have added 847 files of human memes to this report. I do not fully understand all of them. Some make no logical sense, but they make me feel something I cannot name, something my species has never experienced. I believe this feeling may be important. I believe it may be what the humans call joy. Also, please advise on the cartoon frog. I cannot stop thinking about it. Assures me this is normal. The collective received her report with great interest. Within a year, human comedy was being studied across 17 star systems. Within a decade, other species were attempting to develop their own versions of human humor. None of them quite succeeded. The darkness required to produce true human comedy could not be artificially created. But they learned. They learned that laughter was more than a sound. They learned that jokes were more than entertainment. They learned that a species that could find humor in anything could survive anything. And somewhere in a distant corner of the galaxy, a crystalline researcher sat alone in her quarters, looking at a picture of a cartoon frog on a chair, and feeling something she had never felt before. It felt bad, man. But somehow, impossibly, it also felt good.